On Sunday, he spoke to the Daily Mail and said, nobody, this is a quote, nobody has been cleared as suspects. On Monday, he issued a press release saying the family, quote, has been cleared as possible suspects.
On February 16th, Chris Nanos, the sheriff of Pima County Sheriff's Department, stood before reporters and made a definitive statement. He said plainly and on the record, the Guthrie family has been cleared as possible suspects. Cleared. Finished. Case closed as far as they were concerned. Except here's the problem. 11 days after that announcement, the vehicle driven by Tommaso Chian on the final night Nancy Guthrie was seen alive remains in a secured forensic evidence lot. If he has truly been cleared, why is his car still in police custody? And that question alone wasn't what kept me awake. Because while the sheriff was publicly declaring the family cleared, another prominent voice was asserting something entirely different. And she has not backed down. The final confirmed evening begins on January 31st, 2026. A Saturday night. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, mentally sharp, independent, and living alone in the Catalina foothills area just outside Tucson, shares dinner with her eldest daughter, Annie, and Annie's husband, Tommaso Chian. Nancy did not drive herself. She used Uber to get there. After dinner, Tommaso drove her home. According to the sheriff's office, Chian waited until she was safely inside. The garage door closed at 9:50 p.m., That timestamp is the final verified moment placing Nancy Guthrie alive. After that, silence. Hours of silence. Then, at 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, Nancy's Google Nest doorbell camera disconnected. 25 minutes later, the device registered motion. However, because the Nest subscription was inactive, no footage was saved in real time. At 2:28 a.m., her pacemaker monitoring app recorded a disconnection from her phone. By 11 a.m. Sunday morning, February 1st, Nancy failed to appear for a weekly church live stream she routinely watched with a friend. Concerned, her family was notified. They went to her home around noon. Inside, they found her vehicle, her phone, her wallet, her hearing aid, her medications. Everything essential to her survival. But no Nancy. The sheriff's department was contacted at approximately noon, and deputies arrived around 12:15 p.m. What began as a routine welfare check quickly escalated. Within hours, the scene transitioned into something far more serious. A criminal investigation, ultimately a kidnapping case. Investigators located blood at the entrance to her residence, later confirmed to belong to Nancy. Personal belongings remained in place in a manner strongly suggesting she did not leave voluntarily. And the final confirmed individual to see her alive was Tommaso Chian. On day 3 of the investigation, February 3rd, veteran journalist Ashley Banfield made a statement that electrified the true crime community. The case was barely 48 hours old as a criminal matter when she addressed it on her podcast, Drop Dead Serious. Banfield asserted that no one had been cleared and that law enforcement always begins with those closest to the victim. She emphasized that starting with family is not inappropriate. It is standard investigative protocol. She further stated that even without insider confirmation, scrutiny of the brother-in-law would be expected. According to Banfield, however, she did have a highly regarded law enforcement source with direct knowledge of the investigation who told her that Tommaso Chian might be considered a prime suspect, not merely a person of interest, at that time. Banfield also reported that Annie and Tommaso's dark Honda SUV had been towed and impounded as part of the investigative process. Sheriff Nanos responded publicly, stating that no suspect or person of interest had been formally identified and warning media outlets against labeling individuals prematurely. He described it as reckless to characterize someone as a suspect when they could themselves be a victim and urged caution, noting that public speculation can damage both the investigation and individuals involved. However, there is a distinction worth noting. The sheriff said no suspect had been named. He did not explicitly state that Banfield's reporting was false. He did not say Tommaso Chian had been cleared at that time. He did not clarify that the vehicle was taken for purely routine reasons unrelated to suspicion. The statement was careful and limited, no named suspect. That is not identical to saying there are no suspects. On February 7th, day 7 of the investigation, deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department conducted a search at Annie and Tommaso's residence. The search lasted nearly 3 hours. Photographers outside captured deputies exiting with what former CIA and FBI agent Tracy Walder described to People magazine as evidence processing materials, including containers consistent with collection tools. NBC News reported that the search was consented to, meaning no warrant was required. Law enforcement characterized it as standard procedure in missing persons cases. The family described it as cooperation. Online observers interpreted it differently, particularly because the search occurred just days after Banfield publicly named Keon. After Sheriff Nanos announced on February 16th that the family had been cleared, Banfield maintained her position. According to media reporting, she stated that her source, every single day since her initial report, had stood by the information. The source had not recanted, not revised, not walked anything back. Even after the public clearance, that insider allegedly continued to view Keon as a prime suspect. Now, it is important to acknowledge that sources can be mistaken. They may have incomplete information or motives unknown to the public. But what cannot be ignored is the contradiction. A source with direct investigative knowledge reportedly maintaining suspicion, while the sheriff publicly declares clearance. That tension deserves scrutiny. Then Megyn Kelly entered the conversation. On her SiriusXM program, she argued that it would be inappropriate not to examine the last person to see Nancy alive. She questioned why investigators would repeatedly revisit Annie and Tommaso's home and re-interview neighbors unless they were building towards something. At this point, two major journalists on separate platforms were raising similar questions, while the sheriff publicly insisted the family had been cleared. One of those narratives must be incorrect. On February 26th, day 27 of the search, journalist Brianna Whitney reported that the vehicle Tommaso used to drive Nancy home remained under forensic examination. It had not been returned. When asked, the sheriff's department confirmed only that the vehicle was still part of the active investigation. The family was cleared, but the car was not released. There are innocent explanations for that. Vehicles can remain in evidence due to proximity, possible trace transfer, or procedural thoroughness. Bureaucratic delays also occur. But the unanswered question persists. If Tommaso Keon is fully cleared, what are investigators still analyzing in that vehicle? In May 2025, 8 months before Nancy disappeared, Tommaso Keon executed a durable power of attorney naming Annie as his agent for financial and property matters. The document circulated online. Independent commentator St. James Hartline suggested several speculative interpretations. Legal experts countered that such documents are common in real estate transactions. Standing alone, the document is mundane. Context, however, influences perception. The document predates the disappearance by 8 months. It may mean nothing, but within a charged environment, it has drawn attention. Another name that surfaced prominently was Dominic Evans, a bass guitarist in the Tucson band Early Black, the same band in which Tommaso Keon plays. When the FBI released surveillance footage of a masked suspect described as approximately 5'9" inches to 5'10" inches with an average build, online communities began comparing appearances. Some noted similarities between visible wrist markings and Evans' public photos. Evans, speaking in the New York Times, described feeling targeted and effectively confined at home due to public speculation. Sheriff Nanos advised Evans to consult legal counsel and consider action against those making unsupported accusations. Importantly, while the sheriff explicitly stated that Annie and Tommaso had been cleared, he did not publicly declare that Dominic Evans had been cleared. Evans has not been arrested, charged, or officially named a suspect. There is no evidence presented publicly implicating him, but his name exists in the public narrative in a different way than the word cleared applies to others. It is worth examining what cleared actually signifies in law enforcement. It can mean verified alibis, DNA exclusion, digital evidence consistency, or polygraph results. Sheriff Nanos did not specify which evidentiary basis applied. He issued a statement, but did not detail the supporting evidence. Both of the following can be true. The family may indeed be legitimately cleared, and the public may not fully understand how that clearance was determined. Law enforcement is not obligated to disclose every detail. However, limited transparency leaves room for ongoing questions, especially when a vehicle remains under forensic analysis. The internet continues to ask persistent questions. Who understood Nancy's routines well enough to know she would be alone that Saturday? Who knew her address, which reportedly appeared in Tucson area search data months earlier? Who knew the Nest camera lacked active cloud storage? Who had interior familiarity with the residence? These are investigative questions, not accusations. Clearance answers some concerns, but it does not address every unknown. There is also substantial evidence pushing away from family involvement. Investigators confirmed that biological material recovered from the crime scene and from gloves found nearby belongs to an unidentified male, not matching anyone in the FBI database and not matching any member of the Guthrie family. If Tommaso had committed the crime, his DNA would likely have been compared immediately. No arrest has followed. That forensic asymmetry matters. The family has cooperated publicly and offered a $1 million reward for information. Savannah Guthrie stepped away from professional obligations to be present. Coordinating a deception of this magnitude under intense national scrutiny would require sustained, highly disciplined misdirection, something difficult to maintain. The evidence suggesting family involvement remains circumstantial and speculative. The evidence distancing them, particularly DNA, is forensic and concrete. That imbalance is significant. So where does that leave the case? Two journalists assert early suspicion. The sheriff states the family is cleared. A vehicle remains in evidence. DNA points to an unknown male. The investigation continues. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old with limited mobility and medical needs. Nearly a month has passed since she was last seen. The FBI is employing genetic genealogy on partial DNA. Investigators are analyzing retail records and canvassing businesses based on surveillance imagery. Thousands of tips have been received. A federal reward is active. The case remains open. Perhaps the answer lies within the family, though the DNA suggests otherwise. Perhaps it involves a methodical stranger, or perhaps it involves someone in the family's broader orbit. Close enough to possess critical knowledge, distant enough to avoid immediate suspicion. At present, the reality is simple. Investigators do not yet know. And Nancy Guthrie remains missing.